Krelthar stood at the observation window of the diplomatic vessel and watched the stars drift past. He had been a diplomat for the Varane Collective for over 200 cycles, and in all that time, he had never been nervous about meeting a new species. But today felt different somehow. The message from Earth had arrived 3 months ago. It was simple and direct. Humanity wanted to join the Galactic Council. They had finally developed faster than light travel and believed they were ready to take their place among the stars. The Council had reviewed their application and decided to send Krelthar to make first contact. He looked down at his datapad and reviewed the information about humans one more time. They were mammals from a planet they called Earth. Average height, average strength, no natural weapons or armor. Their world had decent resources and a stable climate. They had only been in space for about 300 years, which was very young compared to most Council species. The Varane had been traveling the stars for over 10,000 years. Everything about humans seemed ordinary, even a bit primitive. Krelthar expected this would be a simple assignment. Meet the humans, explain how the Council worked, help them understand galactic law, and welcome them into civilized space. He had done this dozens of times before. The ship arrived at Sanctuary Point exactly on schedule. The station was massive, built centuries ago as neutral ground where different species could meet safely. It orbited a small moon in an empty system, far from any homeworld, perfect for diplomatic meetings. Krelthar walked through the docking corridor and entered the main reception hall. 2 humans were waiting for him. He recognized them from their photos. Commander Jake Morrison and Dr. Amy Chen. Jake was tall for a human, with short dark hair and green eyes. He wore a dark blue uniform with various symbols on it. When he saw Krelthar, he smiled and extended his hand. Krelthar had read about this gesture. It was called a handshake, an ancient human greeting that showed you carried no weapons. Ambassador Krelthar, Jake said warmly, welcome to Sanctuary Point. Krelthar reached out and shook the human's hand. The grip was firm, but not aggressive. The honor is mine, Commander Morrison. I look forward to helping humanity join the galactic community. Amy stepped forward next. She was shorter than Jake, with black hair pulled back in a practical style. She had a friendly smile that reminded Krelthar of some of the younger diplomats in his own species. Please, just call us Jake and Amy, she said. We're not very formal by nature. Over the next few days, Krelthar spent long hours with the 2 humans. They toured the station together. He showed them the council chambers where representatives from 47 different species made decisions that affected billions of lives. He explained the laws that govern trade, travel, and conflict resolution between worlds. Jake asked intelligent questions about military protocols and defense agreements. Amy wanted to know everything about alien biology, technology, and culture. She filled notebooks with sketches and notes, her eyes bright with curiosity. Krelthar found himself enjoying their company. Humans were more emotional than most species he had worked with. They laughed often, sometimes at things that didn't seem particularly funny. They told stories about their lives, their families, their hopes for the future. They formed friendships quickly, treating Krelthar like an old companion, rather than a formal diplomatic contact. On the 3rd evening, they shared a meal in one of the station's restaurants. Jake had requested food from Earth, and the station's synthesizers had done their best to recreate it. They ate something called pizza, which was bread covered in cheese and various toppings. It was surprisingly good. Tell me about your world, Krelthar said. What is Earth like? Amy's face lit up. It's beautiful. We have oceans that cover most of the surface. Mountains, forests, deserts. Every kind of environment you can imagine. The diversity of life is incredible. It sounds peaceful, Krelthar observed. Jake and Amy exchanged a quick glance. Something passed between them, but Krelthar couldn't read it. It is now, Jake said carefully. It took us a long time to get there. Most species go through difficult periods before reaching the stars. Krelthar said kindly. The Varane had many conflicts in our ancient past, but we learned that cooperation and logic serve us better than violence. I'm sure humanity has learned the same lessons. 18. We're still learning, Amy said softly. The days continued. Krelthar introduced Jake and Amy to other diplomats on the station. Most were curious about humans. A few were skeptical, as they always were with new species, but overall, the reaction was positive. Humanity would likely be accepted into the council within a few months. Krelthar felt satisfied with his work. He had handled more difficult integrations than this. Humans were friendly, intelligent, and eager to learn. They would make fine additions to the galactic community. On the evening of the 21st day, Krelthar was reviewing reports in his quarters when Jake stopped by. The human commander seemed relaxed, carrying 2 cups of coffee, a human beverage Krelthar had grown fond of. Mind if I join you? Jake asked. Please, Krelthar gestured to the chair across from his desk. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Jake spoke. I want to thank you, Ambassador. You've been incredibly patient with us. I know we must seem primitive, compared to most council species. Not at all, Krelthar assured him. Every species develops at its own pace. What matters is your desire to learn and grow. Jake nodded slowly. I hope you still feel that way, after you really get to know us. Krelthar found the comment odd but didn't press the issue. Humans often said strange things. It was part of their charm. He had no way of knowing that in less than 48 hours, everything he thought he understood about humanity would be completely wrong. He had no way of knowing that he was about to witness something that would haunt his dreams for the rest of his life. He had no way of knowing that the friendly, curious humans sitting across from him were capable of things that would terrify even the most hardened warriors in the galaxy. But he would learn soon enough. The station's alarms would sound. The emergency lights would flash red, and Krelthar would discover exactly what humans became when someone threatened the things they cared about. For now, though, he simply finished his coffee and wished Jake a pleasant evening. Tomorrow, they would continue the diplomatic process. Tomorrow, they would discuss trade agreements and cultural exchange programs. Tomorrow seemed so far away. Tomorrow seemed safe. The alarms woke Krelthar from deep sleep. He sat up in his quarters, confused and disoriented. Red lights flashed across his walls. A recorded voice spoke in the common galactic language. Alert. Station breach detected. All personnel move to designated safe zones. This is not a drill. Krelthar's hearts began to race. In 200 cycles of diplomatic service, he had never experienced a genuine emergency. Sanctuary Point was supposed to be the safest location in neutral space. What could possibly breach their security? He pulled on his diplomatic robes and stepped into the corridor. Other residents of the station were already moving toward the safe zones, their faces showing various expressions of fear and confusion. A Varane security guard rushed past, carrying a plasma rifle. What's happening? Krelthar called out. The guard barely slowed. Korthak's Dominion. They're boarding the station. Get to the diplomatic wing and seal yourself in. Krelthar felt his blood turn cold. The Korthaks. He had only seen them in historical records. They were enormous warriors from a brutal death world, banned from council space for over 3 centuries because of their violence and refusal to follow civilized laws. They stood 8 feet tall, with natural armor, plating and strength that could tear through most species like paper. He hurried toward the diplomatic wing, but explosions echoed through the station. The lights flickered. Somewhere nearby, he heard screaming. The sound cut off abruptly, and that silence was somehow worse than the screams. When Krelthar reached the diplomatic section, he found chaos. Security forces were setting up defensive positions in the corridors, but they looked terrified. A group of Korthak's warriors were advancing from the main junction, their massive forms filling the hallway. Krelthar watched from a safe distance as the security team opened fire. Plasma bolts struck the Korthak's armor, but barely seemed to slow them down. The warriors charged forward with terrifying speed. Within seconds, they had torn through the security position. Bodies lay scattered across the floor. This was the end. Krelthar understood that now. The Korthax were unstoppable. The station would fall. He began to prepare his mind for death, entering the meditation state his people used to face the inevitable with dignity. Then he heard a voice, human, calm, speaking in English. Connor, Danny, take positions on the left. Lisa, you're with me on the right. Greg, get that civilian to safety. Krelthar looked up and saw Jake Morrison moving down the corridor with 4 other humans. They wore body armor and carried weapons, but compared to the Korthax, they looked impossibly small and fragile. Jake was giving orders like they were on a training exercise, not facing certain death. A young human male, the one Jake had called Greg, spotted Krelthar and ran over. Ambassador, we need to get you to the safe room. Come on, you should run, Krelthar said. The Korthax cannot be stopped by. An explosion cut him off. Greg grabbed his arm and pulled him into a side corridor. With respect, Ambassador, please shut up and move. From his new position, Krelthar could see through a window overlooking the main corridor. Jake and his team had taken cover behind structural supports and storage containers. The Korthax warriors were advancing, their weapons firing heavy plasma charges that melted metal and stone. Then the humans started shooting. Krelthar had seen combat before, in recordings and simulations. He thought he understood warfare. But what he witnessed in the next few minutes was something entirely different. The humans moved like they were part of a single organism. When one fired, the others repositioned. When one needed to reload, another provided covering fire. They weren't just defending their position. They were setting a trap. Jake called out coordinates and directions in a steady voice. 3 contacts advancing, 40 meters. Lisa, suppress left. Connor, flank right on my mark. Danny, hold center. A Korthax warrior charged at Connor's position. The human didn't retreat. Instead, he waited until the last possible second, then rolled to the side. As the warrior passed, Connor fired 3 precise shots into the weak points of the Korthax armor. The warrior fell. Another Korthax raised its weapon to fire at Jake. Before it could pull the trigger, Lisa shot it in the arm. The warrior roared in pain and anger. While it was distracted, Jake shot it twice in the head. It collapsed. Krelthar couldn't process what he was seeing. These humans, these small, fragile mammals with no natural weapons or armor, were killing Korthax warriors. The same Korthax that had just torn through trained security forces without slowing down. But it wasn't just their tactics or skill that shocked him. It was their eyes. Through the window, Krelthar could see their faces. They weren't afraid. They were focused, calculating, almost calm. And there was something else in their expressions. Something primal and ancient that made Krelthar's skin crawl. They looked like predators. More Korthax arrived, trying to overwhelm the human position with numbers. Jake spoke into his communication device. Amy, we're going to need that door sealed in 30 seconds. Can you do it? Coming, a woman's voice responded. It was Amy Chen, the friendly scientist. But her voice sounded different now. Harder. 20 seconds. Get clear of Section 4. All units, fall back to Checkpoint Bravo. Jake ordered. The humans moved in perfect synchronization, covering each other as they retreated to a new defensive position. The moment they were clear, a massive blast door slammed down, cutting off the advancing Korthax. The corridor fell silent, except for the sound of alarms and distant fighting. Jake checked his team quickly. Connor had blood on his shoulder from a plasma graze, but he was still standing, still alert. You good? Jake asked. Takes more than that, Connor said, with a grim smile. Greg returned after securing Krelthar in a sealed room. Ambassador is safe. What's next? We push them back, Jake said simply. There are civilians trapped in sections 6 and 7. We're going to get them out. Lisa reloaded her weapon. Against how many hostiles? Does it matter? Danny asked. His voice was calm, almost casual. No, Jake agreed. It doesn't. They moved out, heading deeper into Korthax-held territory. Krelthar watched them go from behind the safety of reinforced doors. His mind struggled to understand what he had witnessed. These were the same humans who had laughed over pizza. The same humans who had asked curious questions about alien culture and filled notebooks with cheerful sketches. But in combat, they had transformed into something else. Something efficient and merciless and utterly terrifying. For the first time in his long life, Krelthar understood what it meant to feel true fear. Not fear of death, which he had faced with dignity, but fear of something unknown. Fear of a species that could hide such capacity for violence behind friendly smiles and warm handshakes. He wondered what other secrets humanity was hiding. He wondered what they were truly capable of when pushed to their limits. Deep in his heart, he suspected he was about to find out. Krelthar watched through the security monitors in the safe room. Other survivors huddled around him. But he barely noticed them. His eyes were locked on the screens, showing various corridors throughout the station. Jake Morrison and his team were pushing deeper into Korthax territory. They should have been dead 10 times over by now. Instead, they were winning. On screen 3, Krelthar watched Connor move through a darkened corridor. The human's shoulder was wrapped in quick-seal bandages, but he held his weapon steady. A Korthax warrior stepped out from a side passage, raising its massive blade. Connor didn't hesitate. He ducked under the swing, drove his combat knife into the warrior's throat, and continued moving forward. The entire encounter took less than 3 seconds. How is this possible? A Varane diplomat whispered beside Krelthar. The Korthax are the greatest warriors in known space. Krelthar corrected quietly. They were the greatest warriors. On another monitor, he watched Lisa and Danny working together. They had encountered a group of 5 Korthax holding civilians hostage in a cargo bay. The smart thing to do would be to wait for reinforcements. Instead, the 2 humans created a distraction. Lisa fired from one entrance, while Danny circled around through the ventilation system. The Korthax focused on Lisa's position, returning fire with their heavy weapons. They didn't see Danny drop from a ceiling vent behind them. He moved through them like a ghost, taking down 3 warriors before they even realized he was there. Lisa eliminated the other 2 from her position. The civilians were freed within minutes, but what disturbed Krelthar most was watching Amy Chen. The friendly scientist who had asked about alien biology was now sitting in the station's control center. Surrounded by holographic displays, her fingers moved across controls with impossible speed. She was simultaneously hacking Korthax communication channels, rerouting power to critical systems, and coordinating civilian evacuations. Jake, you have 6 hostiles approaching your position from Corridor 12. Amy's voice came through the monitors. Her tone was perfectly calm, like she was discussing research data instead of life and death combat. I'm sealing sections 10 and 11 to funnel them toward you. Connor, there's a wounded civilian in section 8, room 42. Can you reach them? On it, Connor's voice responded. Krelthar watched Connor change direction immediately, moving toward the wounded civilian. He encountered 2 Korthax on the way. The first one. He shot through a weakness in its armor plating. The second one got close enough to grab him. For a moment, Krelthar thought the human was finished. The Korthax warrior lifted Connor off the ground with one massive hand. Connor didn't panic. He jammed his pistol under the warrior's jaw and fired twice. The Korthax released him and fell. Connor landed, checked his weapon, and continued toward the wounded civilian. His expression never changed. He looked mildly annoyed at most. They feel no fear, a small alien creature said from the corner of the safe room. Krelthar recognized her as a Pixith, a species known for their empathic abilities. I can sense emotions from most species on this station. Terror, panic, desperation. But the humans? They feel focus, determination, and something else. Something that frightens me. What? Krelthar asked. Purpose, she said softly. They have absolute clarity of purpose. Nothing else exists for them right now, except the mission. It's like staring into a machine, except machines don't feel the satisfaction they feel when they succeed. On the main monitor, Jake's team had reached Section 7, where the largest group of civilians was trapped. 20 Korthax warriors guarded the area. Jake studied the situation through his helmet camera, then spoke into his communicator. Amy, can you kill the lights in Section 7 for 30 seconds? Done, Amy replied immediately. The corridor went dark. Krelthar watched through thermal imaging as the humans put on night vision equipment and moved forward. The Korthax had good vision, but they weren't prepared for complete darkness. By the time emergency lights activated, 8 Korthax were down and the humans had secured defensive positions. The battle that followed was brutal. The Korthax fought with rage and fury, but the humans fought with something worse. They fought with precision. Every movement had purpose. Every shot found a target. When they ran low on ammunition, they used Korthax weapons. When those failed, they used knives. When a Korthax warrior tackled Greg to the ground, the human used his bare hands to break the warrior's arm and then its neck. Krelthar felt sick, not because of the violence itself, but because of how efficient it was. Humans didn't waste energy on rage or fear. They simply did what needed to be done with terrifying competence. An hour passed. Then, too, the Korthax forces were being pushed back toward their boarding ships. More human security teams had arrived from other parts of the station, following Jake's coordinated battle plan. They moved like parts of a single organism, each team supporting the others perfectly. By the third hour, it was over. The Korthax retreated to their ships and fled. Sanctuary Point was secured. The cost had been high. Nearly 200 station personnel were dead, but it could have been much worse. The humans had saved over 1,000 civilians. When the all-clear signal sounded, Krelthar emerged from the safe room on shaking legs. He made his way to the control center where Amy was still working at the terminals. She looked up when he entered. Her face was smudged with soot and she looked exhausted, but she smiled at him. Ambassador Krelthar, thank goodness you're safe. I was worried about you. No, wrote 3. No, I was worried about you. She sounded like the same friendly scientist he had shared meals with. But Krelthar couldn't forget what he had seen her do. He had watched her coordinate a counterattack that defeated the most feared warriors in the galaxy. She had done it while simultaneously managing a dozen other critical systems. And she had never once raised her voice or shown uncertainty. How? He asked simply. Amy looked confused. How what? How did you do this? You're scientists, diplomats, explorers. You told me humanity had moved past violence. You said you wanted peace. We do want peace, Amy said gently. We want it more than anything. But wanting peace doesn't mean we forgot how to fight. It just means we choose not to. Unless we have to. Jake entered the control center, his armor scarred and damaged. He saw Krelthar and walked over. Ambassador, are you hurt? Krelthar stared at him. This human had just killed dozens of Korthax warriors. He had led his team through impossible odds and won. But he was asking about Krelthar's well-being with genuine concern in his eyes. I'm unharmed, Krelthar said. But I don't understand you. Any of you. Jake nodded slowly. I know. And I'm sorry you had to see that. But those Korthax would have killed everyone on this station if we didn't stop them. You didn't just stop them, Krelthar said. You hunted them. I saw it in your eyes. Jake was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Yes, we did. Because that's what we are. Ambassador. We're survivors. And we're very, very good at it. Krelthar couldn't sleep. 3 days had passed since the Korthax attack. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw human faces, not afraid, not panicked, just focused and deadly. He sat in his quarters with his datapad, searching through humanity's history files. The humans had provided extensive records when they applied to join the Galactic Council. At the time, Krelthar had only read the summaries. Now he read everything. What he found made his blood run cold. Earth was classified as a death world. The Galactic Council used a system to rate planets based on how dangerous they were to life. Most civilized species came from worlds rated 3 or 4 on a scale of 10. Earth was rated 9. Only the Korthax homeworld was rated higher at 10. Earth had survived 5 mass extinction events. Huge rocks from space had hit the planet. Volcanoes had covered continents in ash. The climate had shifted from freezing to burning and back again. Each time, most life died. But some survived. And those survivors became stronger. Humans had evolved during the most recent ice age. They were persistence hunters, meaning they chased prey until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. They could run for hours without stopping. They could go days without food. They could survive in almost any climate, from frozen tundra to burning desert. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was human history. Krelthar read about thousands of years of constant warfare. Humans had fought over territory, resources, religion, and ideas. They had developed weapons of incredible sophistication: swords, guns, bombs, chemical weapons, nuclear weapons. They had created ways to kill each other that most species couldn't even imagine. He found a human concept called total war, where entire populations were mobilized for combat. He read about battles where millions died. He learned about siege warfare, guerrilla tactics, naval combat, air superiority, and dozens of other military doctrines. Every major human civilization had invested heavily in warfare. They had academies dedicated to teaching military strategy. Their greatest leaders were often military commanders. Their stories celebrated warriors and battles. Even their games simulated combat. The Varane had been peaceful for 10,000 years. Before that, they had a few small conflicts. Nothing serious. But humans? Humans had been fighting each other for their entire existence. They had only stopped major wars in the last century or so. Krelthar found psychological studies that made him feel sick. Humans had something called adrenaline, a chemical their bodies released during stress. It increased their strength, suppressed pain, and sharpened their focus. Some humans became more effective in combat, not less. They had words for it: combat high, flow state, being in the zone. He discovered that human children played fighting games. They wrestled, competed, and simulated battles from a young age. It was how they learned social structures and tested themselves. Violence was built into their development. There were human philosophies entirely about warfare. Books with titles like The Art of War that were thousands of years old and still studied. Martial arts systems numbering in the hundreds, each designed for different combat situations. Even their peaceful meditation practices had roots in warrior training. Krelthar found casualty statistics from recent human wars. He saw that human soldiers could continue fighting with injuries that would kill most species. He read about humans who had lost limbs and returned to combat. About soldiers who fought for days without sleep. About medics who ran into active combat zones to save wounded comrades. He learned about human military training. They practiced until actions became automatic. They created stress situations on purpose to prepare for real combat. They studied past battles endlessly to learn from mistakes. Every aspect of warfare was analyzed, improved, and taught to the next generation. The most disturbing file was about human berserkers. Throughout history, certain human warriors would enter a state of rage during battle. They felt no pain, showed no fear, and fought with superhuman strength. Modern humans didn't encourage this behavior anymore. But the capacity was still there, in their genetics. Krelthar put down the datapad and looked at his hands. They were shaking. The Galactic Council thought they were accepting a young, primitive species that needed guidance and protection. But they weren't. They were accepting a species of apex predators who had spent millennia perfecting the art of killing. Jake had said humans wanted peace. Krelthar believed that was true. But he also understood now that humans were capable of switching from peaceful to deadly in seconds. They carried violence inside them like a tool, ready to use whenever necessary. He thought about Amy, the friendly scientist. He had watched her coordinate a military operation with the same skill she used to study alien biology. Because to her, they weren't different skills. They were both about understanding systems and solving problems. If the problem required violence, she applied it with the same cheerful efficiency she applied to everything else. He thought about Connor, fighting with a plasma burn on his shoulder. The human hadn't even seemed to notice the pain. He had jokes and kept moving because the mission wasn't finished. Pain was just information to ignore. He thought about Danny dropping from a ceiling vent, moving through enemy warriors like a shadow. The young human had probably never killed anyone before the attack, but when it became necessary, he adapted instantly. Because humans were survivors, and survivors did what needed to be done. A message appeared on his datapad. It was from the Galactic Council. They wanted his report on humanity's application. They wanted to know if humans should be accepted as members. Krelthar stared at the message for a long time. What should he tell them? The truth was complicated. Yes, humans were violent. Yes, they were dangerous. But they were also kind, curious, and genuinely wanted to be part of the galactic community. The Korthax were violent because they enjoyed conquest and suffering. But humans were violent because they had to be. Their world had forced them to become warriors or die. They hadn't chosen this path. It had chosen them. And now, they were offering that terrible capability to the Galactic Council. They were saying, "We know how to fight. We're very good at it. Let us fight for you instead of against you." Krelthar thought about the 1,000 civilians the humans had saved. About Jake asking if he was hurt. About Amy's tired smile. About Connor carrying wounded aliens to safety, even with his own injuries. Humans were predators. But they were predators who had learned to protect instead of prey on the weak. He began typing his report. The Council needed to understand what humanity truly was. They needed to know the danger. But they also needed to know the opportunity, because the galaxy was not a safe place. The Korthax attack had proven that. And when darkness came again, wouldn't it be better to have humans standing beside them rather than somewhere else? Krelthar took a deep breath and continued writing. His recommendation would change everything. For better or worse, humanity was about to join the stars, and the galaxy would never be the same. The council chamber was enormous. Built to hold representatives from 47 different species, Krelthar stood at the central platform, looking up at thousands of alien faces staring down at him. He had presented his report. Now, they would discuss humanity's fate. Speaker Vothmar, a tall insectoid creature who led the council, raised one of his forearms for silence. "We have heard Ambassador Krelthar's report on humanity. The floor is now open for discussion." Immediately, dozens of representatives activated their speaking lights. Vothmar selected one. A small, blue-scaled creature, named Pipti, from the Aquilus system, stood up. "I believe humans are too dangerous to join our council," Pipti said. Her voice was high and nervous. "They defeated Korthax warriors in direct combat." The Korthax! For centuries, we believed nothing could stand against them. If humans can kill Korthax so easily, what could they do to us? Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Another representative stood. A large bear-like creature called Gron from the Northern Territories. "Pipti speaks truth. I read the battle reports. These humans are efficient killers. They show no fear, no hesitation. This is not a species we want in our alliance." More voices joined in agreement. Krelthar felt his heart sink. The council was afraid. He understood why. He was afraid too. But then another representative stood. This was Keeper Zix, one of the oldest members of the council. His species, the Korathi, had been spacefaring for 15,000 years. When Zix spoke, people listened. "I have seen many species join this council," Zix said, his voice raspy with age. "Some were peaceful, some were warriors, some were artists, some were scientists, but all of them brought something valuable to our community." "Violence," Pipti said quickly. "Protection," Zix corrected. "The Korthax attacked Sanctuary Point. Our security forces failed. They died within minutes. But 5 humans held them off for 3 hours and saved 1,000 lives. That is not violence for the sake of violence. That is courage." "It's still dangerous," Gron argued. "What happens when humans decide they want our planets? Our resources? They clearly have the capability to take what they want by force." Krelthar spoke up. "If I may, I spent 3 weeks with humans before the attack. They are not motivated by conquest. They value cooperation, learning, and friendship. Commander Morrison and Dr. Chen treated me with kindness and respect from the first moment we met. And then they became something else during the battle." Pipti said, "You wrote that in your report, Ambassador. You said you were terrified of them." "I was," Krelthar admitted. "I am. But I'm not terrified because they're evil. I'm terrified because they're competent. There's a difference." Vothmar raised his arm again. "Enough. We have debated for 2 hours and reached no agreement. I propose we hear from the humans directly. Commander Jake Morrison has requested to address this council. I move to allow it." The vote was quick. The motion passed. Vothmar gestured to the entrance. "Bring in the human representative." Jake Morrison entered the chamber wearing a formal uniform. He walked to the central platform with steady confidence, seeming unbothered by the thousands of eyes watching him. He stopped next to Krelthar and nodded respectfully to the council. "Thank you for allowing me to speak," Jake said. His voice carried clearly through the chamber. "I know you're debating whether humanity should join your alliance. I know many of you are afraid of us. You should be." Shocked whispers filled the chamber. That was not what anyone expected him to say. Jake continued. "I'm not going to lie to you or pretend we're something we're not. Humans are violent. We evolved on a world that tried to kill us every day. We spent thousands of years fighting each other. We know more about warfare than any species in this chamber. We're good at it because we had to be good at it to survive. Then why should we accept you?" Pipti demanded. Jake turned to look at her. "Because we learned something important from all that fighting. We learned that violence doesn't solve problems. It just creates new ones. We learned that cooperation is stronger than conquest. We learned that protecting others is more satisfying than defeating enemies." He paused, looking around the chamber. "Earth is peaceful now. We haven't had a major war in over a century. Not because we forgot how to fight, but because we chose not to. We built a united government. We solved our resource problems. We focused on science and exploration instead of weapons and territory. But you still know how to fight," Gron said. "You proved that." "Yes," Jake agreed. "And we always will. That knowledge is part of who we are. But here's what you need to understand. We don't want to use it. When those Korthax attacked Sanctuary Point, every human there wished we didn't have to fight. We wished we could talk them down or find a peaceful solution. But they didn't give us that option. So you killed them," Pipti said quietly. "So we protected innocent people," Jake corrected. "That's what our violence is for now. Not conquest. Not glory. Protection. We fight. So others don't have to." Keeper Zix leaned forward. "What do you want from us, human?" Jake took a breath. "We want to be part of something bigger than ourselves. We want to explore the galaxy and make friends with other species. We want to learn from you and share what we know. We want peace. But if you accept us, I promise you this. If war comes, If someone threatens this council, or its members, humans will stand with you. We'll fight beside you. We'll protect you with everything we have. And if we refuse your application? Vothmar asked. Jake was quiet for a moment. Then we'll be disappointed. But we'll respect your decision. We'll go back to Earth and continue developing on our own. Maybe in a few centuries, we'll apply again. Maybe by then, we'll seem less frightening. Or more frightening, Pipti muttered. Jake smiled slightly. Maybe. But either way, we'll still be out here in the galaxy. You can have us as friends, or you can have us as strangers. The choice is yours. He stepped back from the speaking platform. Thank you for your time. Vothmar dismissed Jake and called for a final vote. The debate continued for another hour, but Krelthar could sense the mood shifting. Jake's honesty had changed something. He hadn't tried to hide what humans were. He had simply explained it clearly and let the council decide. Finally, Vothmar called for the vote. All in favor of accepting humanity into the Galactic Council. Lights began appearing across the chamber. Krelthar watched them count up. It was close, very close. But when the final count appeared, humanity had won by a narrow margin. Vothmar struck his ceremonial gong. The motion passes. Humanity is accepted into the Galactic Council, with all rights and responsibilities thereof. This session is concluded. Krelthar found Jake in the corridor outside. The human was surrounded by other species, offering congratulations and welcome. When he saw Krelthar, he walked over. Thank you, Ambassador, Jake said. For everything. I simply told the truth. Krelthar replied. Though I'm still not sure if I made the right recommendation. Quote, Jake nodded. I understand. We scare you. Yes, Krelthar said honestly. You do. But I'm glad you're on our side. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Krelthar said, I hope the galaxy never gives humanity a reason to show their full capability for war. Jake's expression became serious. So do I, Ambassador. So do I. But both of them knew the truth. The galaxy was dangerous. Threats existed beyond the Korthax. Someday, war would come again. And when it did, humanity would be ready. Not because they wanted violence, but because they understood a simple truth. Peace was worth protecting, and some things were worth fighting for. Krelthar watched Jake rejoin the celebration, and he felt something strange. Despite his fear, despite his knowledge of what humans could do, he felt safer than he had in his entire life, because now he knew that somewhere in the galaxy, humans were standing guard, and nothing would get past them. The second he experienced real terror was also the second he understood what true allies looked like.